Michelle Carter had always been a woman who knew how to make an impression. Standing in front of the mirror in her apartment, she adjusted the collar of her navy blue suit one last time. The fabric was sleek and professional, tailored perfectly to fit her frame. It wasn't just any day. Today was special. Today she would step into a room filled with some of the most powerful people in the business world. She was invited to an exclusive networking event hosted by one of the most prestigious organizations in New York City. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, printed on thick, creamy paper that felt expensive even to touch. Michelle remembered, holding it in her hands for the first time, running her fingers over the embossed letters. Her name was written clearly at the top, Michelle Carter, CEO of Innovatech. Just seeing those words made her smile. Innovatech was her baby, a tech startup she had built from scratch, pouring every ounce of energy into turning it into what it was today. And now, here she was, being recognized as someone worth inviting to this elite gathering. It wasn't just about rubbing shoulders with industry giants, though that certainly had its appeal. For Michelle, this event represented something bigger. As a black woman in a field dominated by men, and predominantly white men at that, she had faced more than her share of challenges. People often underestimated her, questioned her abilities, or assumed she didn't belong in spaces like these. But Michelle had proven them wrong, time and again. Tonight, she wasn't just attending as a guest. She was there as a leader, a trailblazer, and a symbol of what could be achieved despite the odds. She grabbed her purse and headed out the door, her heels clicking against the tiled floor of her apartment hallway. The drive to the venue gave her a moment to reflect. She thought about all the late nights spent working on pitches, the rejections she'd faced when trying to secure funding, and the moments of doubt that had almost derailed her dreams. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was showing up, standing tall and proving once again that she belonged exactly where she was. When Michelle arrived at the venue, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The building was stunning, a modern glass structure that seemed to glow under the soft lights of the evening. A long red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers snapping pictures of arriving guests. Limousines, pulled up one after another, their passengers stepping out in designer outfits and dazzling jewelry. Michelle took a deep breath before exiting her car, reminding herself to stay calm and composed. As she approached the entrance, she noticed a line forming near the doors. Security guards were checking invitations and IDs, ensuring only those on the list gained access. Michelle joined the queue, keeping her eyes forward. She could hear murmurs around her, people exchanging pleasantries, discussing recent deals, or speculating about who might win the upcoming awards. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. Michelle reminded herself that she deserved to be here just as much as anyone else. Near the front of the line stood Jake Miller, a middle-aged man wearing a dark uniform with a badge pinned neatly to his chest. He looked bored, his attention divided between the guests and the screen of his phone. Occasionally, he glanced up to check someone's credentials, nodding briefly before waving them through. Michelle watched him as she moved closer, noting the way he barely made eye contact with anyone. Something about his demeanor struck her as odd, but she dismissed the thought, chalking it up to nerves or fatigue. Finally, it was her turn. Michelle stepped forward, holding out her phone with the digital ticket displayed prominently on the screen. "Good evening," she said politely, offering a small smile. Jake looked up briefly, his gaze flicking over her face and then down to her attire. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, without warning, he shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he muttered, his tone clipped. "This area is restricted. You'll need to step aside." Michelle blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with confusion. "I have my invitation right here." She held up her phone again, making sure he could see the details clearly. "My name is Michelle Carter. I'm on the list." Jake frowned, his expression skeptical. Instead of checking the list himself, he waved dismissively, as if brushing away her words. "If you're not on the list, you can't come in," he repeated, his tone firm. "Please move aside so we can keep things moving." A wave of frustration washed over Michelle, but she forced herself to stay calm. This kind of thing had happened before, in meetings, at conferences, even during interviews. But usually, it resolved itself quickly once people realized who she was. She tried again, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Sir, I assure you I am supposed to be here. I'm the CEO of Innovatech. My invitation should confirm that." But Jake wasn't listening. His jaw tightened and he crossed his arms over his chest. "Look, lady," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I don't know who you are, and frankly, I don't care. If you don't leave now, I'll have to call security." Michelle stared at him, disbelief mixing with anger. How could this be happening? Here she was, dressed professionally, presenting valid proof of her attendance, and yet this man refused to let her in. She glanced around, noticing other guests watching curiously. Some seemed sympathetic, while others appeared indifferent. No one stepped forward to intervene. Realizing that arguing further wouldn't solve anything, Michelle stepped back, pulling out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Daniel Brooks, the organizer of the event, answered on the second ring. "Daniel, hi," Michelle began, her voice measured despite the turmoil inside her. "There's been a misunderstanding at the entrance. One of your security guards won't let me in." On the other end of the line, Daniel sounded shocked. "What? That's impossible. Let me handle this right away." Within minutes, he arrived at the scene, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. Seeing Michelle standing off to the side, visibly upset, he immediately turned to Jake. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Jake stammered, trying to explain himself. She didn't have clearance," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely toward Michelle. "I was just doing my job." Daniel cut him off, his voice firm. "Doing your job means verifying someone's credentials, not turning away one of our honored guests based on assumptions. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel didn't give him a chance. Turning to the growing crowd of onlookers, he raised his voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please accept my sincerest apologies for this unacceptable behavior. This individual is no longer employed by our organization, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Michelle barely registered them. All she could think about was the humiliation of being treated like an imposter in a space where she rightfully belonged. Still, she appreciated Daniel's swift response. When he turned to her, offering a heartfelt apology, she nodded graciously. "Thank you," she said simply. "Let's focus on making tonight productive." With that, Michelle walked past Jake, her head held high. Though the incident left a bitter taste, she refused to let it overshadow the opportunity ahead. After all, she had worked too hard to let one person's prejudice define her experience. The incident at the entrance lingered in Michelle's mind as she stepped into the grand hall of the venue. The room was breathtaking, with high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars against the dim lighting. Tables, draped in white linen, were arranged elegantly around the space, each decorated with fresh flowers and flickering candles. Guests mingled, their laughter blending with the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. It was everything Michelle had imagined, a place where ideas flowed freely, connections were forged, and opportunities seemed endless. But despite the beauty surrounding her, Michelle couldn't shake off the sting of what had just happened outside. She felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, anger, frustration, and even embarrassment. She had faced discrimination before, but something about this moment felt particularly raw. Maybe it was because she had prepared so thoroughly for tonight, wanting to represent not only herself, but also the countless women and minorities who rarely got a seat at tables like these. Or maybe it was because the guard's actions reminded her of how far society still had to go in recognizing and respecting people for their achievements rather than their appearance. Daniel stayed by her side for a while, clearly concerned. "Michelle, I can't apologize enough for what happened," he said earnestly, his voice low to avoid drawing attention. "That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable, and I promise you, we're going to take steps to ensure it never happens again." Michelle nodded, appreciating his sincerity. "Thank you, Daniel," she replied, keeping her tone calm and measured. I know you didn't intend for this to happen, and I appreciate your quick response, but honestly, this isn't just about me. It's about a pattern. People like me often face situations like this, whether it's being questioned, at entrances, or overlooked in meetings. It's exhausting. Daniel listened intently, his expression thoughtful. You're absolutely right, he admitted. And I want you to know that your voice matters. If there's anything specific you think we should do differently moving forward, please let me know. We need leaders like you to help us improve. His words brought a small measure of comfort, but Michelle knew meaningful change wouldn't come overnight. Still, she decided to focus on the evening ahead. After all, she hadn't come here to dwell on negativity. She had come to connect, to share her vision, and to inspire others. With a deep breath, she thanked Daniel once more and made her way into the crowd, determined to make the most of the opportunity. As she navigated the room, Michelle noticed familiar faces, colleagues from past conferences, potential investors. She'd spoken with over email and industry peers whose work she admired. She exchanged pleasantries, shook hands, and engaged in conversations that ranged from cutting-edge technology trends to personal anecdotes about navigating the business world. Despite the earlier setback, Michelle found herself slipping into her element. Her confidence grew with each interaction, and soon, the memory of the security guard's dismissive attitude began to fade, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, Jake Miller sat in a quiet corner of the building's staff lounge, replaying the scene in his mind. He had been escorted away from the entrance shortly after Daniel's announcement, his badge confiscated and his employment terminated on the spot. Now, sitting alone on a plastic chair, he stared blankly at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Jake wasn't a bad person, he truly believed that. In fact, he prided himself on being fair and hardworking. He had taken the temporary job at the event because he needed the extra income, not because he enjoyed standing at doors telling people where they could or couldn't go. But now, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had turned away, the one Daniel had called an honored guest. What had her name been? Michelle? Yes, Michelle Carter. And she was apparently some big-shot CEO. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. A CEO. He had dismissed a CEO as if she were someone trying to sneak into the event without permission. How could he have gotten it so wrong? Jake cringed as he remembered the look on her face, calm but firm, with an undercurrent of disbelief. She hadn't screamed or caused a scene. Instead, she had handled the situation with grace, calling someone higher up to resolve the issue. That alone should have told him he was out of line. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He tried to rationalize his actions, telling himself that he had simply been following protocol. But deep down, he knew better. Protocol didn't require him to ignore someone's credentials or dismiss their explanation outright. No, this wasn't about rules. It was about assumptions. Assumptions based on appearances. And that thought made him feel sick. Back at home later that night, Jake found it hard to relax. His wife Laura greeted him at the door with a warm smile, but her expression quickly shifted when she saw the tension in his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing the door behind him. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake sighed heavily, slumping onto the couch. "I messed up, Laura," he confessed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Big time." Laura sat beside him, concern etched across her features. "What do you mean? What happened?" So Jake told her everything, from the moment Michelle approached him at the entrance to the public firing that followed. As he spoke, he could hear the defensiveness creeping into his voice. "I swear, I wasn't trying to be rude or anything," he insisted. I thought she was part of the catering staff or something. She didn't look like the other CEOs, you know." Laura raised an eyebrow, her gaze piercing. "What does a CEO look like, Jake?" she asked pointedly. When he didn't answer, she pressed on. "Do they all have to wear suits and ties? Do they have to be a certain age or race? Because last I checked, being a CEO has nothing to do with how someone looks." Her words struck a nerve, and Jake winced. "I know, okay? I get it, I screwed up. But it's not like I meant to offend anyone. I just..." I didn't think. That's exactly the problem, Laura said softly. You didn't think. And sometimes not thinking is worse than meaning to hurt someone. Bias doesn't always come from a place of hate. It comes from ignorance, from assuming things about people without really seeing them. Jake fell silent, letting her words sink in. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't deny the truth in what she was saying. He had judged Michelle based on stereotypes, not facts. And now, because of his mistake, he was unemployed and embarrassed, not to mention responsible, for making her evening unnecessarily difficult. I don't know what to do, Jake admitted quietly. How do I fix something like this? Laura placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Start by owning up to it, she advised. Acknowledge that you were wrong and figure out how to learn from this. Maybe take a course on diversity training, or read up on unconscious bias. It won't undo what happened, but it'll show that you're willing to grow. Jake nodded slowly, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the shame. Growth wasn't easy, especially when it required confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself. But if he wanted to move past this, he knew he had no choice. For now, though, all he could do was sit with the weight of his actions and vow to do better. Across town, Michelle ended her evening reflecting on the day's events. She had managed to network effectively, sharing her company's mission and securing a few promising leads for future partnerships. Yet the memory of the security guard's dismissal lingered, a reminder of the barriers she and so many others still faced daily. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Michelle considered the broader implications of what had happened. It wasn't just about one man's poor judgment, it was about a system that allowed such biases to persist unchecked. She thought about using her platform to speak out, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of preconceived notions. With renewed determination, Michelle reached for her phone and opened a note-taking app. She began typing, her fingers flying across the screen as she drafted a message she planned to post online the next morning. The words poured out of her, raw and honest, capturing both her frustration and her hope for change. By the time she finished, she felt a sense of clarity. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she intended to use it wisely. Little did Michelle know her decision to share her story would spark a conversation far beyond anything she had anticipated. But for now, she closed her eyes, ready to rest and prepare for whatever came next. The next morning, Michelle woke up feeling a mix of emotions. She had slept well despite the whirlwind of thoughts that had kept her mind busy the night before. After taking a few moments to gather herself, she reached for her phone and opened the draft she had written late last night. Reading it again, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating awareness and starting a conversation that could lead to real change. She made a few minor edits, ensuring her message was clear and concise. Then, with a deep breath, she hit post. Within minutes, her words began to spread across social media platforms. The post quickly gained traction, drawing in likes, shares, and comments from people all over the world. Many expressed their support, sharing their own stories of facing discrimination or bias in professional settings. Others praised Michelle for speaking out and using her platform to highlight an issue that affected so many. Her post read, "Last night I arrived at a prestigious event ready to network and share my work as the CEO of Innovatech. Instead, I was stopped at the door by a security guard who refused to believe I belonged there. He dismissed me without even checking my credentials. While the organizer handled the situation swiftly, it reminded me of something important. This isn't just about one person's mistake. It's about a pattern of assumptions that continue to hold us back. As a Black woman in tech, I've faced these kinds of challenges more times than I can count. But every time it happens, it motivates me to push harder and speak louder. Let's keep talking about these issues, not just for me, but for everyone who deserves to be seen and respected for who they are." By midday, Michelle's post had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a powerful example of the systemic biases that still existed in corporate spaces. Journalists reached out to her for interviews, and colleagues sent messages of encouragement. Even Daniel, the event organizer, called to thank her for handling the situation with grace and for shining a light on an uncomfortable truth. While Michelle appreciated the attention, she knew the real work lay ahead. Viral posts and headlines might spark conversations, but lasting change required action. She decided to use her newfound visibility to advocate for better practices within organizations, starting with the very group that had hosted the event. On the other side of town, Jake Miller sat slumped on his couch, staring at his laptop screen. He hadn't planned to look up Michelle Carter, but curiosity got the better of him. A quick search revealed pages of articles about her accomplishments. There were photos of her speaking at conferences, leading panels, and accepting awards. Her company, Innovatech, was featured in several tech magazines, hailed as a rising star in the industry. Jake felt a pang of guilt as he scrolled through the information. How could he have been so blind? Everything about Michelle screamed success, from her polished appearance to her impressive resume. Yet, he had judged her based on nothing more than his own biases. The realization weighed heavily on him. His wife, Laura, noticed his somber expression and walked over to sit beside him. "What are you looking at?" she asked gently. "Her," Jake replied, pointing to the screen. "Michelle Carter, the woman I turned away." Laura leaned in, scanning the articles. "Wow, she's incredible," she said after a moment. "No wonder they were so upset." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "I feel terrible, Laura. I really messed up. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I did. And now, because of me, she's dealing with all this attention, good and bad." Laura placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late to make things right," she reminded him. "You can't undo what happened, but you can take responsibility and learn from it. Maybe write her a letter or something. Apologize, sincerely, and let her know you're working on yourself." The idea of writing a letter made Jake nervous, but Laura was right. If he truly wanted to grow from this experience, he needed to face it head on. So later that afternoon, he sat down at his kitchen table with a pen and paper. For nearly an hour, he wrote and rewrote his apology, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he settled on a simple yet heartfelt message. "Dear Ms. Carter, I want to start by saying how sorry I am for what happened at the event. I was wrong to dismiss you and your credentials, and I deeply regret any discomfort or embarrassment my actions caused. Please know that I am taking steps to educate myself about unconscious bias and how to treat everyone with the respect they deserve. Thank you for inspiring me to do better. Sincerely, Jake Miller." He folded the letter carefully and mailed it the next day, hoping it would reach Michelle and show her that he was genuinely remorseful. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks, the event organizer, was also grappling with the aftermath of the incident. Though he had acted decisively by firing Jake, he knew that wasn't enough. The situation exposed flaws in the way his team handled guest verification and highlighted the need for better training and accountability measures. Daniel called an emergency meeting with his staff the following week. "What happened with Ms. Carter should never have occurred," he began, addressing the room. Yertha-like seriousness in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. "We pride ourselves on creating inclusive environments, but clearly, we fell short. Moving forward, we need to implement changes that ensure this kind of mistake doesn't happen again." He outlined a plan that included mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees and contractors, updated protocols for verifying guest credentials, and a system for reporting incidents of bias or misconduct. Additionally, he announced that the organization would partner with advocacy groups to promote equity in professional spaces. When the meeting ended, Daniel felt a sense of relief. He knew these changes wouldn't fix everything overnight, but they were a step in the right direction. More importantly, they showed that he was committed to learning from the incident and doing better. Back at her office, Michelle received Jake's letter a few days later. At first, she hesitated to open it. Part of her wondered if reading it would reopen old wounds. But another part of her, a bigger part, felt curious. She wanted to see if his apology was genuine. As she read the letter, Michelle found herself softening slightly. His words were sincere, and his acknowledgement of his mistake showed a willingness to grow. While forgiveness didn't come easily, Michelle recognized that holding on to anger wouldn't serve her or anyone else. Instead, she chose to focus on the positive outcomes of the situation, the conversations it had sparked, the awareness it had raised, and the potential for meaningful change. That evening, Michelle decided to respond. She drafted a brief note, thanking Jake for reaching out and encouraging him to continue educating himself. She emphasized that while apologies were important, actions spoke louder. By the time she sealed the envelope, she felt a sense of closure, not just for herself, but for the broader mission she was now a part of. As days turned into weeks, the ripple effects of Michelle's post continued to grow. Companies began revisiting their hiring and training practices, inspired by her call for accountability. Employees started speaking up about their own experiences, demanding safer and more inclusive workplaces. And though the journey toward true equality was far from over, Michelle took solace in knowing she had played a role in moving the needle, even if just a little. For Jake, the road to redemption was long but necessary. He enrolled in online courses about diversity and unconscious bias, attended workshops, and volunteered at community centers to give back. Each step brought him closer to understanding the impact of his actions and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Though their paths may never cross again, both Michelle and Jake emerged from the incident changed. For Michelle, it reinforced her commitment to breaking barriers and paving the way for others. For Jake, it became a turning point, a chance to confront his biases and strive to be a better version of himself. And in the grand scheme of things, perhaps that was the most powerful outcome of all. Weeks had passed since the incident at the networking event, but its impact continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways both big and small. Michelle Carter found herself busier than ever, not just with her work at Innovatech, but also with the newfound attention her social media post had brought. The message she shared wasn't just about her experience. It sparked a larger conversation about bias, discrimination, and the need for systemic change. Every day, her inbox filled with emails from people sharing their stories, asking for advice, or simply thanking her for speaking out. At first, Michelle felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of responses. She hadn't expected her words to resonate so deeply with so many people. But as she read through the messages, she began to see patterns. Stories poured in from women, minorities, and other underrepresented groups who had faced similar challenges, being overlooked, dismissed, or treated unfairly because of preconceived notions. Some recounted moments when they were mistaken for assistants or interns despite holding senior positions. Others described being excluded from important meetings or conversations simply because they didn't fit the traditional image of leadership. These stories weighed heavily on Michelle, but they also fueled her determination. She realized that while her individual experience was painful, it was part of a much bigger picture, a pattern of systemic inequity that needed to be addressed. Rather than letting the negativity consume her, she decided to channel it into action. She started planning initiatives within her own company to promote diversity and inclusion, ensuring that Innovatech would serve as an example of what equitable workplaces could look like. One afternoon, Michelle gathered her team for a meeting. "I want us to lead by example," she told them, her voice steady but passionate. "We've always prided ourselves on innovation, but true innovation starts with our people. Let's make sure we're creating a culture where everyone feels valued and respected." Her team nodded enthusiastically, ready to support her vision. Together, they brainstormed ideas for workshops, mentorship programs, and partnerships with organizations focused on empowering underrepresented communities in tech. By the end of the meeting, Michelle felt a renewed sense of purpose. If she could inspire change within her own company, maybe others would follow suit. Across town, Jake Miller was navigating his own journey of growth and reflection. After losing his job, he struggled to find steady work. Many employers hesitated to hire him once they learned about the incident, viewing it as a red flag. It was a humbling experience, one that forced him to confront the consequences of his actions. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, Jake used the time to focus on improving himself. He enrolled in an online course about unconscious bias, spending hours each week learning about how stereotypes and assumptions shape behavior. At first, the material felt foreign and uncomfortable. He had never considered himself prejudiced, but the lessons revealed blind spots he hadn't even realized existed. One module in particular stood out to him. It explored how seemingly harmless judgments could lead to harmful outcomes. The instructor emphasized that bias wasn't always intentional. Often, it stemmed from societal conditioning and lack of awareness. Jake took notes diligently, determined to absorb every lesson. He also attended a workshop hosted by a local nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion. There he met people from all walks of life, some who had experienced discrimination firsthand and others who, like him, were working to unlearn harmful habits. Listening to their stories opened his eyes in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I had no idea," Jake admitted during a group discussion. "I mean, I knew there were problems, but hearing it directly from people who've lived through it, it's different. It makes you realize how much work still needs to be done." The facilitator smiled warmly. "Awareness is the first step," she said. "What matters now is what you do with that knowledge." Encouraged by her words, Jake committed to taking action. He began volunteering at community centers, helping with events and programs aimed at supporting marginalized groups. Though it was challenging at times, especially when he made mistakes or faced criticism, he reminded himself that growth required discomfort. Slowly but surely, he started to rebuild his confidence, not as someone who thought he had all the answers, but as someone willing to listen and learn. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks, the event organizer, was implementing the changes he had promised. His team worked tirelessly to revamp their processes, ensuring that future events would be more inclusive and respectful. They introduced new training modules for staff and contractors, focusing on recognizing and addressing biases. They also created a feedback system where guests could report concerns anonymously, allowing organizers to address issues promptly. To hold themselves accountable, Daniel partnered with advocacy groups specializing in workplace equity. These organizations provided guidance and resources, helping his team develop strategies to foster inclusivity. In addition, he invited speakers to address topics like racial justice, gender equality, and allyship at upcoming events. By shining a light on these issues, he hoped to create spaces where everyone felt welcome and valued. Daniel's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Attendees at subsequent events praised the improvements, noting the increased professionalism and attentiveness of the staff. Even Michelle, who attended another gathering hosted by the organization, remarked on the positive changes. "It's clear they're taking steps in the right direction," she told a colleague during a break. "It gives me hope." Still, Daniel knew there was more work to be done. Change didn't happen overnight, and he understood that maintaining progress required consistent effort. But seeing the impact of his actions motivated him to keep pushing forward. As weeks turned into months, Michelle found herself reflecting on how far she'd come, not just professionally, but personally. The incident at the networking event had been painful, but it had also pushed her to use her platform for good. Her advocacy efforts gained traction, inspiring others to join the movement for equity and inclusion. She gave interviews, wrote articles, and spoke at conferences, urging companies and individuals alike to examine their practices and commit to meaningful change. One evening, after delivering a keynote speech at a tech summit, Michelle stood backstage, sipping water and catching her breath. A young woman approached her, her eyes bright with admiration. "Ms. Carter, thank you for everything you're doing," she said softly. "Your story gave me the courage to speak up about my own experiences. I don't think I would have had the strength otherwise." Michelle smiled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she replied. "It means more than you know." Moments like this reminded Michelle why she kept going, even when the road felt long and difficult. Every voice that joined the conversation brought them closer to a world where no one had to prove their worth based on appearance alone. Back home later that night, Michelle sat at her desk, jotting down notes for her next project. She knew the fight for equality wouldn't end anytime soon, But she also knew she wasn't alone. People like Daniel were working to improve systems, while individuals like Jake were striving to become better versions of themselves. Together they formed a collective force, one capable of breaking down barriers and building bridges. As she closed her notebook and turned off the light, Michelle allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The journey ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but she was ready. For every obstacle, there was an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to inspire. And that, she realized, was what truly mattered. Months had passed since the incident at the networking event, and life had moved forward for everyone involved. Michelle Carter's advocacy work continued to gain momentum, inspiring countless individuals and organizations to take a closer look at their practices and biases. Her efforts weren't just about raising awareness, they were about creating tangible change. She became a beacon of hope for those who felt unseen or undervalued in their professional lives. One crisp autumn morning, Michelle stood backstage at a major conference hall, preparing to deliver the keynote speech. The event was packed with industry leaders, innovators, and young professionals eager to learn from the best. As she adjusted her microphone and glanced at the sea of faces before her, she felt a surge of gratitude. This was where she belonged, not because of how she looked or what others thought of her, but because of the hard work and resilience that had brought her here. Her speech began with a simple yet powerful message. Change starts with us. She spoke candidly about her own experiences, the challenges she faced as a Black woman in tech, the moments of doubt, and the times when she had been underestimated. But rather than dwelling on negativity, she focused on solutions. She shared stories of people who had reached out to her after her viral post, thanking her for giving them the courage to speak up. She highlighted companies that had taken bold steps toward inclusivity, proving that progress was possible. We often think of leadership as being at the top, Michelle said, her voice steady and clear. But true leadership is about lifting others up. It's about recognizing the value in every person and making sure they have a seat at the table. That's how we build a better future, for ourselves, for our children, and for generations to come. The audience erupted into applause, many standing to show their appreciation. For Michelle, this moment wasn't just about personal validation. It was about seeing the collective power of voices coming together to create change. After the speech, dozens of attendees lined up to thank her personally. Some handed her notes of encouragement, while others asked for advice on how to foster inclusivity in their own workplaces. Michelle took the time to connect with each person, knowing that even small actions could spark big transformations. For Jake Miller, the months following the incident had been transformative. Losing his job had been a wake-up call, forcing him to confront the biases he hadn't realized he carried. At first it was difficult. Rejection after rejection made him question whether he'd ever find stable employment again. But over time, he began to see these setbacks as opportunities to grow. He dedicated himself to learning and volunteering, slowly rebuilding his confidence and reputation. Jake eventually found part-time work at a local community center, helping organize programs for underprivileged youth. The job wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of purpose. Every day he interacted with kids who reminded him of his younger self, eager to learn but unsure of their place in the world. He listened to their dreams, encouraged their ambitions, and shared lessons he'd learned along the way. One afternoon, a teenage girl named Ava approached him during an after-school session. "Mr. Miller," she said hesitantly, "I want to be a scientist, but sometimes I feel like people don't take me seriously because I'm a girl. Do you think I can really do it?" Jake knelt down to meet her eye level, his expression sincere. "Of course you can," he replied firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There will be challenges, sure, but if you believe in yourself and keep pushing forward, nothing can stop you." Ava smiled, her eyes lighting up with determination. Watching her walk away, Jake felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew he couldn't undo the mistakes of his past, but moments like this showed him that he could still make a positive impact. Daniel Brooks, the event organizer, also continued to champion inclusivity within his organization. The changes he implemented had not only improved guest experiences, but also strengthened the team's commitment to equity. Staff members participated in regular training sessions, openly discussing ways to identify and address biases. Guests noticed the difference, praising the warm and welcoming atmosphere at events. Daniel's efforts extended beyond his immediate circle. He collaborated with other organizations to host joint initiatives aimed at promoting diversity in professional spaces. Together, they launched mentorship programs pairing young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds with experienced mentors. These programs provided guidance, support, and networking opportunities, helping participants navigate the challenges of their industries. At one such initiative, Daniel crossed paths with Michelle again. They exchanged pleasantries, reflecting on how far they'd both come since the incident. "Thank you for everything you've done," Daniel said sincerely. "Your courage inspired so many of us to do better." Michelle nodded, appreciating his words. "It takes all of us working together to create real change," she replied. "I'm glad we're on the same page." Their conversation reinforced the idea that meaningful progress required collaboration. No single person could solve systemic issues alone, but together, they could build a foundation for lasting transformation. As winter approached, Michelle decided to take a step back and reflect on her journey. She spent a quiet evening at home, flipping through old photos and journal entries. Each memory served as a reminder of how far she'd come, from sleepless nights, building Innovatech, to standing on stages and sharing her story with the world. Though the road had been challenging, she wouldn't trade it for anything. Every obstacle had shaped her into the leader she was today. She picked up a pen and began writing a letter, not to anyone specific, but to herself. In it, she acknowledged the pain and frustration she had endured, celebrating the strength she discovered along the way. She wrote about the importance of resilience, gratitude, and staying true to one's values. By the time she finished, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. The letter would remain tucked away in her desk drawer, a reminder of her growth whenever she needed it. Jake, too, took a moment to reflect. On a chilly December evening, he sat by the fireplace with Laura, sipping hot cocoa and thinking about the year behind him. "Do you think I've changed?" he asked softly, staring into the flames. Laura smiled, resting her hand on his. "You've definitely grown," she said, "and that's what matters most. Growth isn't about being perfect, it's about trying to be better every day." Her words resonated deeply with Jake. He realized that while he couldn't erase his past mistakes, he could continue striving to improve. Each day presented a new opportunity to learn, to listen, and to contribute positively to the world around him. In the end, the incident at the networking event had touched lives in unexpected ways. For Michelle, it became a catalyst for advocacy and change. For Jake, it sparked a journey of self-awareness and redemption. And for Daniel, it underscored the importance of accountability and leadership. Though their paths may never fully intersect again, their stories remained intertwined, a testament to the power of reflection, resilience, and unity. As snow began to fall outside, blanketing the city in a fresh layer of white, Michelle gazed out her window, feeling hopeful. The world was far from perfect, but she believed in its potential. With every voice that joined the conversation, every action taken to break down barriers, and every heart opened to understanding, the future grew brighter, and that, she thought with a smile, was worth fighting for.